Hello there, welcome to SP 7.1, Demonstrate an Understanding of the Measures of Central Tendency and Range for Sets of Data. So central tendency is talking about these three words, mean, median, and mode, and explaining the similarities and differences among them. Determine what mean, median, and mode mean and find those numbers for a set of data. So basically, central tendency just means that you're comparing numbers and comparing sets of data and maybe summarizing it. And these are three different ways that you can do that. So we will get into that in a minute. And then the last part here where it says range, determining the range. So that range isn't really a measure of central tendency, but it is a way to describe your data as well. Provide a context, so that means why do we need to know this? And when do you use those specific measures of central tendency, because some are better in certain situations. Solve a problem involving measures of central tendency. Analyze a set of data to identify any outliers. So this word is important. It just means, are there any numbers that don't really fit with the rest of the data? So if you have results like scores on a test where 50%, 55%, 51%, 60%, and 99%. Well, the 99 doesn't really fit with the rest of the data, so that would be an outlier. So any number that's way larger or way smaller than the rest of the set. Explain the effect of outliers on the measures of central tendency. So if we include those outliers when we calculate these measures, it sometimes can skew our data or make it inaccurate. Next one, identify the outliers and justify whether they should be included or not. So we'll see whether that skews your results or changes anything or whether they should be included. Provide examples of situation in which outliers would and would not be used. Explain why qualitative data, such as the color or a favorite activity, cannot be analyzed for all three. There's only one of these measurement one of these guys that you can use with a set of data that isn't numbers. So if I was asking you what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, there's only one of these ones that we can use. So we will see which one that is. Okay, so here is a little chart of mean, median, and mode, and then at the bottom we've got range. So mean, remember this word, mean just means average. And average is a really easy calculation to do. You just take all the numbers, doesn't really matter what order they're in, you add them up. So they've added these numbers up, they got 30, and then count the numbers. So how many numbers do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6, yes. And so they've divided that total by the number of data in the set. So 30 divided by 6 is 5. So that is how you find average, which is exactly the same thing as mean. It's just another way to say it. Those two words are exactly the same thing. Median, this takes a little bit more work because you have to put the numbers in order. And then you're going to find the one that is in the dead center of the set. And so because the dead center spot where I've put this red line happens between 3 and 6, they took an average of 3 and 6 and came up with 4.5, or basically the number that is right in between those. Mode is the number that appears most often, and so you don't have to put the numbers in order for this, but if you had a really big set of data, you might want to, because you can have more than one mode. Like I could have 2 8s in this set of data, so then your mode would be 3 and 8, but in this case we have 2 of those guys, so it's the most common number, so our mode is 3. Range is the difference between the highest and lowest. So they've taken the highest number, they've taken the lowest number, and they've said the difference is 8. So that means that if you were to look at it on a number line, it goes from 1 to 9, and that means there's 8 numbers in between there. So it's a range, a spread of, I should be using my pen, of 8 numbers. Okay, I'll find my pen. Found it. Here we have some mean girls. and it says, back in high school, I never went for mean girls because I prefer them above average. Haha, little math joke. So remember that mean. Yeah, see, I'm so much better when I have my pen. Mean just means average. All right, so why are we using this stuff? What is the point? So there are, I'm just changing colors here. Up at the top in the red, I've just listed a few reasons why you would use measures of central tendency. If you want to summarize your data, so if you're testing a certain pattern, or if you're examining a certain experiment or something and you've calculated how many customers you have at their bank that day, or what the favorite flavors of ice cream are, you would maybe summarize that and say, well, this is the most common answer, or the average person spent this much time in the bank, or whatever. So if you want to just provide a summary, then you would use one of these measures of central tendency. It's also really handy for predicting future events. Okay, and so if you can look at what you what the normal results are, then you can say that I bet tomorrow it will be similar to this. Also, you might want to analyze past patterns, like you can say the weather in the last 7 Januaries was an average of whatever temperature, or was a range of whatever temperature. And using central tendency also gives you a benchmark, what is actually normal. And so those are some reasons why we'd use this. So when do you use each one of these? So you're going to use average or mean. The data has to be numbers. You can't use mean with answers like vanilla. It has to be numbers. So for example, finding out the average of your test scores. They use it all the time in sports for like a batting average for baseball players. Mean is best used when there are no outliers, when all the numbers are fairly similar. So if you have outliers, you probably aren't going to get a very good calculation of mean, because if your numbers are 1, 2, 97, and 98, say those are your test scores, somebody got 1%, somebody got 2%, and then somebody got 97 and somebody got 98. If you took an average, if you took the mean, you'd get somewhere in the middle, which is about 50. So does that describe, is that the best description of your test scores? Probably not, because you've got some extremes that are really low and some extremes that are really high. So mean is best used when all the numbers kind of match, they're fairly similar. Median, when to use that number that is right in the middle. Again, you have to have numerical data, and you're trying to find which number is in the dead center of all of that. If you have some outliers, you can still use median, because it's not in my example above, but normally you're not going to have somebody scoring 1% on a test, right? So median is a little bit better, a little bit more accurate way to describe your data if you've got some extremes happening. And if you want to see an overall pattern, like for example, if we were studying how long our customers had to wait when they came to our bank, and so we're the bank manager, we want to know how long the wait times are. You could analyze data all day long and say, well, this person came in and he spent 4 minutes, this guy spent 5, this guy spent 19, this guy spent 3, this guy spent 20, and this guy spent 21. If you actually analyze that, you'd say, well, we kind of have 2 different sets of data here, right? We have the 3, 4, 5, and then we have a 19, 20, 21. And so you might find that interesting, and you go back to your data and you think, these guys were just using the teller and these guys were applying for bank loans. So that gives you an overall pattern that you might not see if you were just calculating the average, adding up all those numbers and dividing by 6, because that would give you an answer somewhere in the middle, like 10. Well, nobody spent 10 minutes in the bank. Not one of the customers did. So that it wouldn't be accurate to say on average they're spending 10 minutes in there. Okay, mode. Mode is that one calculation of central tendency that we can use for non-numerical answers like chocolate. So if I said We're surveying everyone. We want to know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, and chocolate was the most popular answer. So mode is the one that counts how many times that number appears in the data. So what is the most common? Okay, if you're asking about pets and the most common answer is goldfish, you can use mode. You couldn't use median, you couldn't use mean to calculate that non-numerical stuff. You can use all three if you want to compare and see how they differ, because you might have outliers and you might want to see which one is the most accurate. And again, like I said on the first slide, you could have two, right? Goldfish and hamsters maybe tied for first. So you could have two most common answers. This last part on range, when should you use range? If you need to use all the numbers in your data set, for example, if you own a clothing store and you want to know what sizes of clothing people are purchasing, well, just because size 7 was purchased the most doesn't mean that that's what you should order, because then you're not going to, what's the word? You won't be catering to every client, right? Because we're not all size 7. So in a range, you would need to order size 1, size 2, size 3, all the way up to whatever, size 16. So some cases it's better off that you know the range, and average has nothing to do with it, and maybe you sell, most commonly you sell size 7 or something, but you still need to provide all the sizes, the whole range. You might also use range if you want to know the upper and lower limits of something, like temperature. So in January, we had a day that was -1, and then we also had a day that was -54. And so you can say there was a range of 53 degrees, which happens in Saskatchewan. So, all right. Range is also handy if you don't need an actual accurate score. If you're just reporting, say, like IQ scores, they wouldn't normally give you a one number IQ score. They would give you a range, and they would say, well, we tested your IQ, you're normal, which means your score is somewhere between 85 and 115. And they do this for a couple of different reasons. Like, they don't want you to compare your IQ score of 107 to someone else's of 105 and think that you're superior, because they're all within the normal range, give or take. And sometimes there's some fluctuation in those scores, so they just report it as a range, saying most days you would fall in this range. If you're having a really good day and you've had lots of sleep and a good breakfast, you might score a little better. If you're tired and your dog died that morning, you might score a little worse. So also they use range when you need to expose the variety of answers. So you'll often see this on like microwave popcorn. They'll say cooking times may vary according to your microwave. So they wouldn't want to give you what the average cooking time is, because that you need to know that some microwaves take 2 minutes and some take 4. So they report it as a range. Okay, so this is just a little example of how those scores can all come out differently. They are comparing two basketball players, Anne and Rich, and here's their 5 games. So Anne scored 12 and Rich scored 10 on the first game, and then 0 and 13, etc., etc. So if you were going to give them the average, they both add up to the same number. They both add up to 50, and then we divide it by 5. They both are scoring an average of 10. But if you look at the median, which number, if you line them up from lowest to highest and found the number in the middle, Anne actually has a 12 in the middle and Rich has a 10 in the middle. If you consider the mode, the one that happens the most often, well, look at Anne's. She had a game where she scored 0 and a game where she scored 0. So that is her most common, whereas Rich's, he scored 10 and 10. So Rich's score looks way better. So how do we know which one to use and when? So here we have just a summary of what we just talked about. So who's the better player? Well, it depends what you're looking for. It says if you have an office pool, if you're going to be betting on how many points these two are going to score in the next game, you would probably use their mode. which number occurs the most often, because chances are Anne is going to score a 0 and Rich is going to score a 10, because that's the number that happens most often. If you had a pool and the winner was the one who came closest to the player's score, you would use their average, their mean. Okay? Because on average, they're scoring about 10. So if you guess 10, you're probably going to get somewhere close. If you want to know what score you'd have to get to have a better than even chance of outscoring Anne or Rich, you'd want to use the median, which is the number in the middle. So these numbers don't really indicate who is better, but they do paint a good picture of the types of players Anne and Rich are. So you can see that Rich is fairly consistent. He doesn't have any outliers. Anne is, some days she's a rock star and she scores 25 points, and some days she scores 0. So she's kind of hit and miss. She's a bit inconsistent. So using range in this option, they've said that's not really helpful right now. So Anne is scoring between 0 and 25 points. It's not really a measure of central tendency. It doesn't really tell us much. So there you go, mean, median, and mode.